Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Ayşe Süberker. Since late last year, Turkey has been engaging in a renewed diplomatic push to shore up its relations with North Africa. Securing trade and energy deals has been a major focus, but the conflict in Libya also looms large. In late January, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan visited Algeria, where he met with newly elected President Abdelmadjid Tebboune. The two leaders discussed energy cooperation and new construction projects. But it was hard to ignore the conflict happening next door. Our correspondent Aylin Unver Noi, who was in Algiers for the visit, has more.
Touching down in the Algerian capital, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan starts his three-country Africa tour. Walking shoulder to shoulder with Algeria's newly elected president, the two leaders are also hoping that they can see eye to eye on a host of issues.
Ülkemiz ve Cezayir arasındaki geçmişi 5 asra dayanan ortak tarih, derin kardeşlik ve dostluk bağlarından güç alarak ikili ilişkilerimizi ve işbirliğimizi her alanda daha ileriye taşımak inancındayız.
But despite having a common history with deep-rooted cultural ties, relations between the two countries haven't always been amicable. In 1955, when Algeria's independence first came up for a vote at the United Nations General Assembly, Turkey was one of 26 countries that voted against the North African nation. It took nearly 3 decades for Turkey to undo what it considered a mistake. The first step came in 1985, when the then Prime Minister Turgut Özal met with Algerian leaders, explicitly apologizing for Turkey's unfavorable votes of the past. But this visit was about new beginnings. And one of the first agreements signed by the two leaders on this trip was for the establishment of a high-level cooperation council. One of the first goals under this agreement will be to boost the trade volume to $5 billion a year. That's more than a 60% increase from its current level. The two countries will also be looking at ways at establishing a free trade agreement, reducing the barriers on imports and exports. And the two sides have eased visa requirements, which will make it easier for businesses as well as tourists to travel. These goals will help cement Turkey in its relationship with Algeria as one of its top partners on the continent. But the Turkish president's trip wasn't only about dollars and cents. An ongoing conflict in another North African country was proving to be too close for Algeria's comfort. In Libya, warlord Khalifa Haftar's LNA has been waging a campaign to overthrow the internationally recognized government. The Libyan conflict is of particular importance for Algeria, given their long shared border. The country's newly elected president, Abdelmadjid Tebboune, certainly does not want to see a country at its footstep become a failed nation overrun by militia. Up until now, it's maintained a fairly neutral stance, but it has also said that the possible fall of Tripoli to warlord Khalifa Haftar's forces would be a red line for them. So this trip to Algeria by the Turkish president is an important one in terms of wooing it to its side. It's aiming to get more international support for Libya's government of national accord led by Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj.
بالنسبة لما يجري في المنطقة لنا اتفاق تام مع السيد الرئيس والشقيقة تركيا على أن نتبع ما تقرر في برلين.
But as long as the current situation on the ground continues, the question remains, how much longer will the Algerian president stick to a wait-and-see approach? Aylin Unver Noi, TRT World, Algiers.
And joining me now is Aylin Unver Noi, who is an associate professor of international relations at Istinye University, and Jalel Ouerghi, who is the director of the Maghreb Center for Research and Development. Aylin, Jalel, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you here. So President Erdogan visited Algeria, Senegal, and Gambia as part of his Africa tour. He had previously visited 27 countries, but with the Gambia visit, this number rose to 28. We're going to talk about Turkey's Africa policy, but Jalel, in terms of developments at home and abroad, tell us about the significance of President Erdogan's Algeria visit.
Yeah, I think we can look at the visit of Recep Tayyip Erdogan in terms of making a follow-up of what already has been done in the previous visits, in terms of boosting the economic ties with Algeria, and they want to make progress and improve from $3.6 billion as a trade deal to 5, and as well.
Is this viable, by the way?
Yeah, I think they can do better than that in the mid and long term, as Algerian keen to improve and have a better relationship with Turkey, especially they share common grounds in many ways, vis-a-vis what is happening in Libya, what is happening in the East Mediterranean, about conflicting terrorism.
Jalal just quickly mentioned it, but Aylin, tell us about Algeria's role in its region, and how do you think Ankara and Algiers' national and strategic interests overlap in the region? I mean, what are their common interests in particular?
Actually, both countries support the political process in Libya. So Algeria, as a country which has a border, a 1,000-kilometer border with Libya, has a legitimate security concern. So its priority is to have a secure, stable neighbor. So in this respect, Turkey's approach to Libya that supports the political solution, political process in the country, overlaps with the Algerian interests too. So that's the one point. The two countries both are shared. So the second one is to improving the trade relations that Jalal mentioned briefly. They have a target to increase the trade between two countries to 5 billion. It's possible because there is already ongoing projects like building a joint petrochemical facility in Turkey. This will be joint project between the state-owned company of Algeria and Turkish company. So there are also other things we forgot to mention. It's a free trade agreements. Both leaders agreed to begin the negotiations on this.
But on the other hand, under Bouteflika, Algeria had some isolationist policy for over these years. Tell us about the new government and the president's priorities in the region. Because it used to be so dependent on France. Now, can we say that now it's chipping away from France and Russia and looking out for new contacts, reliable partners maybe?
That's what the thing that made the visit of Recep Tayyip Erdogan very significant, because Algeria is changing right now. And I think it's moving towards the right direction. Try to build a democratic regime. They held, let's say, a free election. But I think now the Algerian will have a different approach of depending to France. And Turkey will look at Algeria right now as the gate to the Great Maghreb and to Africa. And I think Algeria, if changing better towards a democratic regime, will certainly be open to Turkey and will cooperate with Turkey more, because they have common interests in the region, in Africa, and
but tell us about the Algerian government stance on the Libyan conflict, because somehow it manages to talk to both warlord Khalifa Haftar and on the other hand, the internationally recognized government.
Yeah, you are totally right. The attitude of Algeria is a little bit complex and complicated, because they try to not showing that they are taking one side against the other, but in the same time, they refuse the move of Haftar to take Libya by force, and they warned him many times that it's a red line to get Tripoli by force, and that's what helped the, I think, the Berlin conference
yes.
and the move of Turkey as well, striking a deal with
But the
Russia.
decisions taken by the Berlin conference have already been breached by Haftar.
Yeah,
we all
that's
know
right,
that.
yeah.
Aylin, very quickly, tell us about Turkey's foreign policy, especially for North Africa, because we know that President Erdogan paid a visit to Tunisia and he's in touch with Libya. We all know that. And now his latest visit to Algeria. Tell us about Turkey's North Africa policy.
It's totally actually related to the what's happening in Eastern Mediterranean region, because the complicated maritime boundaries issue and the isolation of Turkey from this process, and also the projects which exclude some actors of the region from the oil drilling or gas drilling and exploration activities in the region, ignoring their rights. Like the Turkish Cypriot side, Turkish Cypriots. So all these push Turkey to take some actions. Since 2000s, Turkey's became a very active force, an actor in Africa continent. It was even declared as the strategic partner by the African Union in 2008. So it's totally active. So when the debates are going on the Eastern Mediterranean, especially when the Turkey signed a memorandum of understanding on maritime boundaries with Libya, Somalia, another African country, invited Turkey to explore oil and gas in the Somalia coast. So there are too many complicated issues, but Turkey openly invited all the countries, which is a coast Mediterranean Sea, to reach an agreement on maritime boundaries. So that's a good development in this respect.
All right, unfortunately, we're out of time. Aylin, Jalel, thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk. The Aegean Sea has long been known for its scenic beauty, but hidden behind that image of paradise are a series of flashpoints. Decade-long disputes between Turkey and Greece have almost led to war on a few occasions. From Greece's illegal militarization of islands close to Turkey's coast to cat-and-mouse games on the high seas, the Aegean has become a potential hotspot. Let's take a quick look at how the two countries got here.
Biz hiçbir şekilde hakkımızı çiğnetmeyiz. Bu bir tehdit değil diyoruz.
All those in favor, please press the green button. Those against, the red button.
And joining me now is Dimitris Tsarouhas, who is an associate professor of international relations at Bilkent University. And Mehmet Celik, who is the managing editor of the English-language Daily Sabah newspaper. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you here. So among the most contentious issues between Turkey and Greece are the military tensions in the Aegean, controversy over the natural gas exploration in the East Mediterranean, failure of the Cyprus peace negotiations back in 2017, and a Greek court's decision to grant asylum to 8 Turkish military officers who had essential roles in the failed coup attempt in 2016. Before breaking into details, Dimitri, give us an overall picture of the Turkey-Greece relations. Where do they stand now?
Right, so I think we need to take a step back and say that relations between the two countries had improved massively following the so-called earthquake diplomacy back in the late 1990s. And of course, it's important to remember that political leadership at the time played a very important role. The late Ismail Cem and Yorgos Papandreou, as the foreign ministers of the two countries, did very much not only to overcome the military tension between the two sides, but also open up new channels of communication, many of which are still alive today, particularly peoples-to-peoples diplomacy. And so for a considerable period of time, and in line with Turkey's EU aspirations and the reform drive that Ankara was engaging in, relations between the two sides improved considerably. Over the last 4 to 5 years, and I think it is important to put this in a global context, we have had the return of a type of international relations less based on the idea of order and cooperation, and much more on the idea of might. And I think that there is now a new sort of foreign policy adventurism, which also affects the two countries, and which has led to bilateral relations deteriorating quite considerably.
So, Mehmet, apart from several public feuds, I mean, the two-country relations, as just Dimitri mentioned, remained somehow calm in the last couple of years. But all of a sudden, things changed. What's the reason?
Well, I think, just to build on what Dimitri said, the Turkey-Greece relations are not independent of what's happening in the region. When it comes to simply the humanitarian issue of refugees, for example, we cannot say this is an issue between Turkey and Greece, where the source of conflict is Syria. We cannot say that the Mediterranean issue is just a simple issue between Turkey and Greece when Libya is in the equation, when France is in the equation, when Israel and Egypt are in the equation. So I think, yes, there is conflicts between these two countries, but they're not conflicts that are necessarily actually, Turkey and Greece are the source of these conflicts all the time. And that has to do with the fact that what happens in the region affects directly to Greece and Turkey. But because these two countries are simply neighbors, they don't, the risk of elevation to a hard conflict actually minimizes at the same time too. The fact that they can't let one another fail, or they can't turn this conflict into a hot conflict, it's not because there is no willingness, or it's not because there's willingness to turn it into a hot conflict. It's because they can't allow that to happen, because both countries will suffer, and the region will suffer. But
I just have a statement from the newly appointed Greek Chief of General Staff. He says Greece is currently going through some turbulent period with regards to the ongoing geopolitical developments within and around the country. And he said the most appropriate way to maintain stability and peace in the region is to be constantly well prepared for war.
Well, I think that's a very good, actually, trend that is happening nowadays internationally. This is not just something the Greece is positioning itself as a hard power. However, if we look at the Mitsotakis' government, when he was first elected, we were expecting somewhat softer tones in Turkey-Greece relations. However, given the geopolitics of the region, they have to have that hard position, particularly for their voters and how they basically let go of Syriza because of that weakness in leadership.
Dimitri, do you agree, or do you believe there is kind of a mood in the Greek government that wants to compromise actually find some kind of a rapprochement with Turkey, or just go with the hard line?
I don't necessarily agree with Mehmet's point with regard to the new government in the following sense. I think there is a very high degree of continuity in Greek foreign policy vis-à-vis Turkey. And I think it's sometimes quite easy to try and find differences between different administrations. For instance, in this case, between the Syriza administration and the new government. However, if you look at the broader picture, within Greece, there is a very large degree of consensus vis-à-vis Turkey being the main theater of Greek foreign policy. And again, this is a point of difference between the two countries, I think. For Greece, Turkey is pretty much, now that the Prespes agreement has been approved and the North Macedonia dispute has been solved, Turkey, in a way, remains the only major theater of foreign policy, quote-unquote, dangers for Greece. And therefore, the Mitsotakis administration line, I think, is quite clear, and this was made also very recently clear following the earthquake in Turkey. On the one hand, the people's diplomacy that I mentioned before.
There's no problem with that.
You know, when it comes to cooperation between the two sides on, let's say, the economic or the cultural front, the Greek government wants to continue it, and I think it's doing the right thing. It also wants to maintain open channels of communication with Turkey, both politically and also militarily, which hopefully will lead to the minimization of the possibility of conflict in the Aegean.
Give us a Turkish insight. I'm sorry, but the defense minister, Hulusi Akar, just recently called on Greece to demilitarize 16 islands on the Aegean. So tell us about the two countries' risk perception and why Greece is militarizing those islands.
Well, this is not the first time, actually, Turkey has had a problem with regards to the islands' militarization. As you know, they have to be demilitarized as per the Treaty of Lausanne. However, starting from the 60s, Greece has militarized these islands, and Turkey has, stated its position, saying that you cannot do that. Diplomatically, they have taken steps, and Greece would turn around and say, well, these are for civilian purposes, and we're not doing that. However, Turkey says clearly you're violating this agreement, and you shouldn't be militarizing. Of course, I think I was misunderstood in the first section, saying that there's not a linear Greek's foreign policy with regards to Turkey being a danger. I think that danger is staying there. However, the tone can shift at some times, and the militarization of islands is part of that. At some points, that tone will be escalated, and maybe the military visibility will be enhanced and escalated. At times, that will be toned down. For example, we talked about people-to-people diplomacy, and I think the very last unfortunate earthquake we had in Turkey is also part of that. When it comes to the fires, for example, the forest fires we had in Greece, Turkey again extended its hand. But when it comes to Cyprus, for example, it is something that Turkey and Greece will not be able to cooperate unless there is a compromise.
So is there a possibility to revive the Cyprus peace negotiations? Do you see any will on both sides to resume talks? Because apparently it lies the core of the problems.
I think it does, and I think you're right. It is important to try and revive the peace talks. If you look at the developments that have happened over the last 2 to 3 years, I think they are the result of a failure of diplomacy and an attempt to ride the waves of the current international political climate, by which attempts are being made by both sides to actually corner the other. Now, my argument is this is not going to lead to any one of the two sides actually prevailing, because you can create short-term alliances, but geography, in our case, is destiny. And for the two peoples to continue to living together in peace, major thorns in the back of the foreign policy of both sides, such as Cyprus, need to move away.
So what is the way forward for the improvement of relationships? Do you believe that Athens and Ankara put aside their differences and concentrate on different sectors like trade, energy, tourism, and migration? Because we know that Greece is planning to install a floating barrier in the Aegean so as to stop migrant boats arriving from Turkey. What is your take on that?
I think, yes, we need that humanitarian, cultural, and economic cooperation to somewhat build on political and diplomatic relations as well. But at the same time, I think one thing that we need to acknowledge is that the regional realities don't change. And we shouldn't be, Greece, for example, shouldn't be afraid of talking to Turkey when it comes to the drilling. We can't hold our guards against each other, and we should give diplomacy a chance. And when it comes to the humanitarian issue, I think that's a whole different problem that Greece needs to solve with the European Union and other European countries to speed up the processes of their allocation in other countries. Otherwise, I mean, how can you stop a boat with chains when it's full of people and they're risking their lives on the sea? I don't think any country should risk that or put people in that danger. And other solutions should be discussed and studied for that humanitarian issue.
Hopefully we won't be seeing any hot conflicts in the near future. Gentlemen, I'm afraid we're out of time. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk. I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you.
And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Ayşe Süberker. If you've got any comments, do share them with us on Twitter with the hashtag Straight Talk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.